Welcome, author and writing instructor, Amber Royer. Yay!
Hi, thanks for having me on the podcast again.
We are second time in, and it is a perfect time because it is kind of chilly outside and it is supposed to be rain coming, and we're talking about cozy comfort today. One of the previous episodes, you've had one of like the best playing episodes, and people love that when you're talking about the character agency in rom-coms. So we are talking today about like what makes a cozy mystery cozy.
Bit of a relation to a rom-com with a cozy.
Ooh, really?
Well, a lot of times a cozy is going to have a romantic element in it as well as the mystery. The mystery is always the main focus, but there's usually some kind of relationship or family or friend thing going on with the character. And a lot of times there's, it is the cop who's investigating the case going to be somebody who's going to be important in the character's life, or is the sidekick friend who helps them uncover the clues going to be a little bit more than a friend later on? So, there's always that tension and humor that comes from having a little bit of a rom-com element inside the cozy.
So in case listeners don't know, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and your writing?
So I'm an author in the Dallas area, and I'm also an author coach and writing instructor. I've been teaching for UT Arlington since 2008, and I do continuing education, novel writing classes. I also teach memoir, short story, various other things. We've tried poetry. It only made a couple of times, so I don't know if that one's going to continue to be on the roster. Because of that, I put together this lovely book. Story Like a Journalist takes you to those journalistic questions of 5 W's and H from the point of view of a fiction writer wanting to write fiction that feels real. And that's not just in realistic genres, but also things like sci-fi and fantasy and all of that. Do you understand your world building enough that it feels like you have a reference book to go look at it? So I'm all about the worksheets. There's over 100 worksheets in the book.
Ooh.
And one of them is a 17-page set of world building questions so that you can really understand your world.
I recently went to a world building class at the Roanoke Writers Conference. We were both at. And yeah, it was so awesome. And like they brought up some really great questions about your world that may never make it on page, right? On screen.
Yeah.
But it was really important that you understand the infrastructure of your own world, which I thought was super eye-opening and just really cool to think about.
Yeah. And if you're writing something, since we're talking about cozies today, if you're writing something like a mystery, having the understanding of those character motivations. So that would be the section for mystery I think people would focus on in the workbook, because there's interviews for your villain, interviews for your main character, what would your character do type of scenario things, where if you don't know the character well, by the time you get to book 5, you better know the characters, so they're a lot easier to write. But when you're first starting something new, and these people are just showing up on the page, sometimes taking them into a blank room and asking them, why are you wanting to solve a murder? You are a cake decorator or a yarn shop owner, or whatever, will give you enough about the character's backstory to understand their motivations, to write it so that it doesn't feel awkward. Because that's the thing with me, is if a mystery feels like the character has been shoved into the book because the occupation is cute, but that character psychologically isn't suited for solving mysteries, I'm never going to be able to fall in love with the book, no matter how cute the cover is and how cute the title and how cute the cake shop or the dog grooming, whatever it is. To me, it always comes down to character, no matter what genre you're dealing with.
That's one thing too that always kind of draws me in to a mystery, because it's got to be, like you said, those characters, and it's got to make sense for them that they're going to solve this mystery, and that even these certain characters would interact with the mystery a certain way, or even the protagonist. Because one thing that drives me bananas, if we're talking about a little bit about world building, is sometimes I can tell when an author may not have tracked out the mystery very well. clues don't seem to make sense. It kind of seemed like they're shoved in there, or like the scenes and the settings don't really give much to the mystery. So it becomes a little flat to me. And I think that's a big part of the mystery too, sometimes, is the world that you're setting them in.
And when people think about world building, like you were talking about the session at Roanoke Writers,
Mhm.
a lot of that is focused towards things like sci-fi and fantasy. But you really do have to think about world building even in a contemporary setting, especially if it's going to be inside a hobby or an occupation, because you can totally tell if somebody isn't part of an occupation, they didn't interview people, they didn't do the research to figure out how technology is actually used, how words are actually used. And one thing I did with my Bean to Bar books, I knew a lot about chocolate, and it would have been tempting because of the research I had done for the Chocolateverse books and all of that to just say, okay, well, I know everything, let me just move forward. But whenever I was able to connect through Dallas Chocolate with an actual chocolate maker, shout out to JL from French Broad. There'll be video from her coming up on my YouTube not too long from now. But giving her pieces of the manuscript where my character was actually making chocolate. I didn't ask her to read the whole book because that's a big ask, but it was maybe 10 pages. And I was asking her, am I describing these processes right? Because I've taken a hands-on chocolate making class once and I've visited some people's facilities. And some of the things you just don't notice. Like she told me, and it was part of the plot, that there was one room and where the characters were moving and all of that in her shop, but you don't, because of heat and dust, you don't winnow the beans in the same area where you're going to finish the chocolate. So I needed a wall. And even being in a chocolate shop, the wall might be there, but would you think to ask to get all of those little details right? When one of the best reviews I've had of the series, Sander from DallasChocolate.org, when he was talking to me about it after he read the book, he's like, I can't believe this was written by somebody who isn't in the chocolate industry. And that's the feedback you want. You don't want people to be like, oh my goodness, this isn't how specifically chocolate works. I have read books where they're doing things that are impossible. Like it takes about 3 days to conch chocolate, and they'll have them making the chocolate fresh every morning. It just threw me completely out of the story. Research that the author could have very easily done.
So you're mentioning a little bit about your kind of Bean to Bar series. So there are 5 books, right, in the Bean to Bar series currently. So this is you just released the 5th book.
Yes, a few
Okay.
days ago.
No, and that's the one thing I love about your books, is that you do put so much love and research into all of the books. And like you said, the Chocoverse books are very distinctly different from the Bean to Bar. So, and I love watching your Instagram for that reason alone. I'm always like, what is Amber researching this time for her books?
And where did I get to go for coffee?
Right? And like she gets to go to all the coolest places. You guys love coffee shops, especially around like Texas, like,
Mm,
or really anywhere, but go check it out. She has the coolest collection of like coffee shop places she's been to.
got back from Hawaii, and we were able to visit some chocolate farms and some coffee farms. So I've got 2 videos up now on my YouTube, and I'm calling them chocolate and coffee field trips, because people love the stills on the Instagram, but I think I can take little videos when I go somewhere. Like we'll do one for Asheville, but we did one for Oahu and one for Big Island. And we got to sit down with a chocolate maker no, it was a chocolate grower at 21 Degrees Estate, talking about what it's like to grow chocolate just north of the area where you're supposed to be able to, because it's 20 degrees north and south of the equator, and they're at 21 degrees, which is the 21 Degrees Estate. And then you can see like the tour we took at Manoa Chocolate and all of that. So I want to do a lot more documenting because I've done the research, but it's still photo of, okay, this is the Alyssa in Galveston doesn't give you the same thing as, okay, well, here's me going through whatever I've done for research. I like to share. I used to be a librarian, you can tell. So I want to give everyone all the information.
I can see that translated in your books because they feel so real. They feel visceral.
Reviewers also will say that the books make them hungry. So
I can
read
see it.
with chocolate.
Definitely, definitely have some chocolate handy. And we talked a little bit about it, about the a cozy mystery, like having the focus on the community and positive friendship aspects that help like define part of the genre. Like,
Yeah.
how did you integrate those connections into your Bean to Bar series and how did you highlight them?
Well, I started with a character who was a little bit isolated, and she was coming back to a hometown. And that's kind of a standard in one type of cozy mystery. So coming back, reconnecting with your community in a different way. And so I started with her having a few friends she's kept in touch with electronically. She got married, moved to Seattle. Unfortunately, her husband passed away, so she's a recent widow coming back, opening this chocolate shop in memory of the dream that they had for when her husband retired and they were going to travel the world and do chocolate and all this kind of stuff. So she psychologically, because of the trauma, is a little bit closed off. And I think that allowed me to introduce the character slowly so that as she's building friendships, each one of those characters becomes more distinct than if I just threw her into a town where she's got 40 friends. And some of the
Mm.
relationships are able to change over time. A minor spoiler, in the first book, there's a blogger who is kind of her nemesis because he thinks she's the murderer. And so he's saying things on his blog and they're not getting along. And through the course of the story, by about book 3, they've become friends. So there's a great scene in the current book where my character is at lunch with her parents at a restaurant that features in a number of the books. And Ash just slides into the booth beside her and takes a chip off of her tray. And the parents are like, "What is your relationship to this person?" And she's like, "Yeah, we're friends now." And I've also tried to make her shop, which is, I think, why the theme of usually a business or a hobby or something, it allows for interaction with a wide variety of people. But I've tried to make that shop, Greeting and Felicitations, she wants it to be a hub in the community where people can come in and spend time and sit down. And the way I've been doing the little snapshots at the end of each book, you see her in her shop. And as the shop is expanding in this book, she actually opens up an annex. She gets the space next door. So the shop is expanding. Her circle of friends is expanding. Her sense of community is expanding each time.
What a great way to integrate like more people into the fold, like more community, you know?
Yeah.
And I love that you show relationships and how they ebb and flow because that's kind of how real relationships are. They aren't just static. They ebb and flow with time. And by the way, listeners, you did hear right. Greetings and felicitations is
Mm.
a fun little pun because the character's name is Felicity. You did hear that right, I promise you, and I want you to appreciate it as much as I do.
And there's layers to it too,
Mm.
because Greetings and Salutations from Charlotte's Web, because her husband passed away. That was one of his favorite books. There's that whole connection there. And then at some point, I'm going to tie my sci-fi roots in because there is an episode of Star Trek where the aliens say greetings and felicitations 3 or 4 times. So I haven't figured out when or where, but I really want there to be like a Star Trek convention or something going on next door.
That is amazing, and I did not even know that, and I really wanna watch that episode now. But, you have a lot of callbacks, actually. You have, like because the A Study in Chocolate, right, is taken from Sherlock Holmes.
A lot of the cozy mysteries do that where they have the punny titles. I
Mm.
made a list earlier: Gone with Gouda, Live and Let Chai, Did One Kill Two. But a lot of times there's a theme, and so it starts from a title. And I love it when people actually pay that off. What I don't like is when the cozy mystery has this adorable title and it's a literary reference and it has like nothing to do with actual book. So when you have those references, you can play with them in so many different ways. I got very meta with it. In a study in Scarlet, there's a part of the plot that has to do with the carriage horse. Well, I didn't want to copy the same plot, but I wanted to pay the homage. So there's a carriage horse that plays a role in the plot. If you look at the cover, so you're literally in a study where there is a murder, and you have that whole reference to the skein of scarlet thread running through life that is a murder that must be solved. So there's literal thread that they find, which kind of implicates her yarn shop owner friend and gives you a whole different way to go into the mystery. Then that whole idea of a study being a painting, it's called chocolate painting, and people do it for parties, and you can actually buy them online. Some of the really intricate ones, like there's one that always pops up that's got Marilyn Monroe in that famous scene where she's like holding her dress and everything. Somebody did a very detailed version of that using different shades between white chocolate and dark chocolate. And so to make it literal, they're gonna offer to paint her. The guy at the beginning whose study it actually is, he offers to paint her in chocolate because she has a chocolate shop, and now she has this whole murder mystery thing. So she's developed a little bit of a following, and there's a podcast that the blogger has that's like only murders Felicity has been involved with. A lot of fun to just play in all your different influences.
And like we were talking about, like you include a lot of different types of occupations, a lot of different hobbies. So, like, how can writers incorporate those crafts, foods, and hobbies and occupation into their cozy mystery?
Well, like I said, a lot of times you have that theme.
Hmm.
And so if it's got a very specific title, that's going to help be a draw and help people expect that, Leslie Budowitz has a series, but it's in Pike's Place and it's an herb and tea shop. And so you open with the character being in the shop dealing with a business problem, and then, oh no, here's something that has happened. There's a murder. I kind of did something similar with that first book in the Bean to Bar, where it's called Grand Openings Can Be Murder,
Hmm.
because one of her employees dies at her grand opening party. So when you do that, it gives the character a stake in the story, because if they can't solve the murder that happened on their premises, they might be implicated. And if you don't do that, you have to figure out a way that whatever happened shuts their business down until it can be, investigated and all of that. So if you get the character at a critical juncture where something important is happening at the business and they can't afford for it to be shut down for a few days, it gives them a bit more motive to actually solve it and a personal stake in the story. Because if they've been implicated, or if, when it's a culinary mystery, often somebody gets poisoned, and if their restaurant, tea shop, cake place reputation is tarnished by the fact that somebody could have been murdered by someone who works there or whatever, them having to help solve that gives them another personal layer to why this person is solving the mystery, as opposed to the actual authorities or anyone else in the story world.
That's like a really cool method too, like you said, to kind of draw the protagonist into the fold of that mystery. What kind of is the difference between the cozy mystery and just like a normal mystery?
It's all about feel, it's an aesthetic.
Mm.
So we come to cozies because we want to be a little bit safe. So there's obviously going to be a murder, because you can't really have a murder mystery that doesn't have a murder, right? But the violence is very toned down. Most of the time it's off screen. If it is on screen, it is not graphic at all. And we don't get attached to the character who's dying, because it happens very early on. It's usually somebody we haven't, as a reader, spent time with, even if the character has. Um, and that way we're able to emotionally attach to these other characters. The only danger in that is that if the killer turns out to be someone that we're really attached to, that can be a disappointment to a cozy reader. So you have to really think about giving enough foreshadowing to make sure that the reader's not going to be upset by who it turns out to be at the end. And then the way that friendships are built, the conflicts can be there, but the interpersonal conflicts are never going to be trauma inducing.
Mm.
So you might have a nosy mom or an overbearing sister, but you're not going to have somebody who's abusive. For the most part, I mean, some people do go a little bit edgier with their cozies, but when you think of a cozy, it's going to be something where we've walked into a safe space. Sure, people are going to fight and things are going to go wrong, and if there's a romance, there's going to be bumps along the way and misunderstandings and all of that, but nothing truly horrific and scarring is going to happen. And then when the violence has happened at the beginning, there may be a second or third body that shows up, but again, it's not on screen. It's something where we look away. We don't really look at the graphic details because we're in it for the puzzle solving, not the actual violence. And you have to really think about things when you're putting things together, especially when it relates to friends and pets, because pets can be put in danger in a cozy, but you never want to make anybody really, really worry, and you never want to kill the pet because that's breaking a cardinal unwritten rule. You don't kill the cat, you don't kill the dog. People, we don't care so much about the animals are innocents, and because they're innocents, they don't deserve anything bad at the hands of the plot. So like in this current one, the cat winds up being catnapped and winds up at the scene of the crime, but I diffused it by when they realize the cat has been catnapped, the police already are like, we have this cat, where did it come from? So the cat is fine. And people do get very concerned about things like that. And I've talked to other cozy writers who will have readers write them and be like, I don't think you're feeding the dog in your series well enough. He shouldn't be eating that. He should be eating this. Or, I don't know what happened with the dog for a couple of chapters. Is someone taking care of it, or are you just leaving it alone?
People are very passionate about the pets. I don't think I'm that crazy, but like, yes, if I see like an animal like on in a book or on film or on TV show, like I'm just like, there better not be anything happening to them. They
Yeah.
better be living the best life that they got.
There's a YA book by Gordon Korman, and I read it when I was doing the youth librarian thing, and it's called No More Dead Dogs. And it's about a kid who gets all upset, and he's like, okay, if it's got an award symbol and a dog on the cover, I'm out because the dog is not going to be having a happy ending. And he's like, red fern grows, old yeller, all of that. And his thing is no more dead dogs. And his teacher is very much about those kind of books and wants to make a play from one of them, and he refuses to participate, and there's all kinds of hijinks, and it's a Gordon Korman book, so it's hijinks and chaos and fun. That's always made me think, when you go to a bookstore and you look at a cover, a lot of cozies, you're going to have a dog on the cover, but you can trust in a cozy that dog on the cover is going to be cute for the whole book.
I like the sound of that. And you have an animal on all the covers of your books because an animal or a furry sidekick, or sometimes not so furry sidekick in one case, is featured in that specific book. How do you weave those companions in without feeling too forced or letting them kind of steal the show from like other characters or the actual mystery?
They do want to steal the show.
I know they do because they're
They
so
really
cute.
do. I mean, even the octopus, Clive, every time there's a scene in that apartment where he's at, he steals the show.
Mm.
But I made it important because there's a clue, and he knows something. But yeah, he's the octopus that gets out and roams the apartment when he's not supposed to, and he's eaten all the fish in the other tanks and everything. It's hard not to let him steal the show with that. I think the key is to make sure you don't have too many scenes that are
Mm.
like that, and that they have to have a payoff. Because if you're going to spend a lot of time on the habits of an animal, why? right?
Mm,
So if it doesn't tie back into the book or it doesn't characterize the character in the scene, then I don't think the scene really belongs, because it would be very easy to have a scene where Satchmo does nothing but wander around and look cute and people pet him, and it would be fun, right? He's a beagle and he's adorable and he's a therapy dog, so why not, right? Even though he's a therapy dog and it would highlight his function as a therapy dog, which is what I wanted to highlight with the book, it would take away from the story, because Felicity is supposed to be solving a mystery and getting her life in order. And any scene where that is not happening or doesn't feed into it, you could write it as a cute little extra and put it on the website, and I'm sure some people would go and look at it. Uh, but it's going to make the book diluted and it's going to make it weaker. But you want to make sure that you don't lose track of the animal in question, because people will get upset. One of my beta readers for the current one, Satchmo, is in a scene and then my character leaves, and the beta reader was very adamant that she wanted to know, even though it was a scene where there were a bunch of people who everybody knew who Satchmo was. She wanted me to make sure that I handed him off to somebody specific, because
mm.
she did not like the idea of him being lost in this scene where somebody had been abducted and nobody taking care of him. And you got to make sure that you have that balance where you can't just put them somewhere and forget about them. They're now a real character and they have needs and they have a right to be in scenes too. Otherwise, people are like, why did you introduce this adorable thing? And then it didn't come back for the rest of the book.
No, and I am with you for that. If an animal is introduced, I want to know what happened. Don't
Yeah.
leave me in suspense, especially if it's like any kind of mystery and we got murder roaming around. So let me know where he is at all, he or she or it is at all time. And you mentioned something I thought was very interesting. Like, do cozy mysteries, do they always have a murder in them? Because that was always something that I was like, does the mystery always have to be a murder for a cozy?
I've never read one that wasn't.
I
And
haven't either. That's why I was asking.
I think that's pretty much expected. And I know
Mm,
that's weird
okay.
because we talked about, safe space, sense of justice, and all of that. But I think something of weight has to be at stake. And it might work for a short story or a children's, maybe even a YA mystery, where you had less of a stake and it was maybe, a missing item or something like that. But to drive a series, because almost all cozy mysteries wind up being a series, you have to have something that is that urgent that the character can drop everything else that they're doing, and that earth shaking that their world is going to be disrupted and changed forever, because now they're being forced to become a sleuth when that was not part of their identity before. And I've played with that a lot. Felicity has been very adamant that she's just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She's not actually a detective. This is not her thing. And
Mhm.
she's finally coming to the point where she's like, maybe I kind of like aspects of this.
Well, when it keeps happening.
And that's also a thing that you have to figure out, is how do you make it not feel weird that it keeps happening? And so I did that whole, they talk about hanging a lantern on something when you can't do anything about it. And it comes from set design, where if there's something on stage and it has to be there, but it's anachronistic or it doesn't fit the design, you hang a lantern on it. Now it's a light bulb, right?
Mhm.
So instead of a bug, it's a feature. And the way I handled that is Felicity is very concerned about the idea that she's become a murder magnet. And every time that one of these, because there's a literary piece in every book where she's literally come across or been handed a classic piece of literature that I reference back and forth. A Study in Scarlet was the most prominent one of those, but she's got a case in her shop where people come and they view the murder books, and she's got this whole reputation now, and people will dare themselves to eat her 100% chocolate and all this kind of stuff, so that rather than having it be weird that there's so many murders that she's just happened upon, it's actually become a thing that bothers her, and she wants to know why. And she's very upset anytime classic books are talked about because, she doesn't want any more of those in her life. And then when people come to the shop to see all of the things that prove she's actually a detective, she can't not embrace it because it's helping grow her business, but at the same time she's like leery of those people.
No, that's completely fair. And I love the track that you took that you were kind of meta about it. Like she's aware that there's like a lot of murders going around. And then it's kind of become like a destination now.
But if something like that happened in your life and all of a sudden you went for, she's in her 30s, so 30 years never having seen a murder, and then in 1 year of your life, here you are solving your fifth case that you didn't ask for. I mean, something's up, right?
Something we had touched upon a little earlier was a cozy mystery is distinctly different from romance, but it has romantic elements. If we're
Yeah.
talking about Felicity in particular. And you do feature a love triangle, right?
Yeah.
So how do the genres differ in handling the romance?
Well, romances in cozies are always going to be written very sweet, simply because this is a safe space. And so it's a lot more emotional development and it's a lot more supportive than some things you see in the romance genre, where sure there may be a misunderstanding, sure they may have the differing ideas on how to do something or why, but there's always a good intention. There's never any of this whole overcoming one character committing something that's traumatic and why are these two together. There's always a good reason for them to fit together. A lot of it is uncovering the character's backstory, and you have to do that kind of slowly because it's a series. And if you have the characters go from, hey, we just met, to, hey, we're getting married in 2 books, where do you go from there? Right. um, there are some TV series who had multiple seasons, and it was all about the will they, won't they, and then they finally have the big wedding episode, and then they try to have another season after that, and everything just it kind of drains.
Mm.
So if you're going to have, and I have seen series where the characters do wind up committing, getting married, whatever, during the middle of the series, you have to figure out what you're going to do with that dynamic afterwards. So you got to really think, how can I give this a slow burn? Which is one reason why I put in the love triangle. And like I said, some readers love it and some readers hate it. And I think it's because they've been burned before.
Mm.
There have been series where it's gone on for 30 books and there's still the triangle, because if you get rid of the triangle, you kind of get rid of everything that you've built, and then it feels like the series is over. But if you're not ready for the series to be over, you don't want to give that feeling of a big conclusion.
Mhm.
And I'm getting ready to close the love triangle in the next book. Um, so it's going to be Autumn's wedding, and all of the stuff that's been building for 5 books is going to come to a head. And then I have planned a next book after that where the new normal is presented, and you find that there is still going to be a friend dynamic and everything, so that those characters don't have to go away. But it's going to be, the big challenge is going to be keeping the emotional momentum once decisions have been made.
What a great point too you bring up. So you had already planned for this to happen. So how far out did you track your books to make sure that that didn't fall flat afterwards?
The character arc, I planned the whole thing from when I was doing the outline for the first book. Um, so I knew kind of where I wanted it to go. I knew who she's going to wind up with. Um, and then I just kind of, when people are like, I'm team one, I'm team the other, I'm just like, when I talked about it with my agent, she's like, you have a plan now, but by the time you get into it, this other character might run away with your protagonist. And I'm like, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure I know how to make it work where um, both both of the guys get what they need, so that there's one character that needs Felicity more than the other. for reasons, which, spoilers. But you really have to think about that is when you introduce a triangle, you're giving the character two possible futures. So she's got to pick the future that makes sense for her. But when you're looking at a series and you're developing these secondary characters, it's also got to be a future that makes sense for the secondary characters. So the other two edges of this triangle, um, in in order for you, and this is the other reason I think a lot of people don't ever close their triangles. You don't want it to feel unsatisfying for the one that's not chosen. Because if you do that, then your character all of a sudden goes from being the protagonist everyone liked, to the hard-hearted person who rejected somebody who was worthy. And that can alienate readers too. And so if I'm going to try and continue a series after the decisions have been made, there has to be a good resolution on all sides of the triangle in order for readers to be, okay, she made a decision, it was the best for everyone, and now we can move forward.
Well, and I think that's because even in the romance genre itself, or at least that's what I found, that the love triangle is pretty divisive because of
Mm,
that. Because a lot of people are like, somebody's going to get hurt, right?
yeah,
Either you don't make it interesting enough because you're not, there isn't a fair fight, maybe. So to
yeah,
say like fair fight between the two choices, and like it's very obvious one will come out the winner,
yeah.
or like you said, someone's kind of just left out in the cold and it's just kind of left hanging, just like, okay, that was fun.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Yeah,
Right? Like the readers get invested and they love your characters just as much as you do sometimes. And they want a happy ending, or at least they want a satisfying ending, right? Like you
yeah,
mentioned, like a satisfying like conclusion for the other character too, even if they didn't get the protagonist in the end.
yeah. And if you have to give them solid reasons for wanting the romance,
Mhm.
so they have to be invested too. And when you look at, story structure, if you looked at either of the guys as the protagonist, you get to the end of the hero's journey or whatever, and you've got that whole sacrificing what you thought you wanted to get what you need. That's how I'm kind of looking at it, is what who really needs what in this verse, and what kind of future will each one of them have that makes everyone have a happy or happy-ish ending.
I knew that the connections were always super important in
Mm.
like especially a cozy mystery, but I didn't realize that you could also have the element of romance. Do you have to have that in there for cozy mystery?
Different readers like different things, and I've noticed that even with reviews for the same book, some readers will be like, "Ooh, I'm team Logan," or "Ooh, I'm team Arlo," and some people are like, "Just make up your mind already." Well, some people like the love triangle aspect, some people don't. Some people prefer to focus more on the character's business interests, on the character moving forward emotionally as a person, maybe mending fences with family. Sometimes they're coming back to somewhere they used to live. And so a lot of it is about them, picking themselves up and, reconnecting with people in their community in a different way. Or they may be having a new experience where they're opening a business in a small town they've never been to, or they're going to go live on an island that they've only visited, and now this is going to be totally different. So there's a lot of different aspects, but there's always a character component.
So you had kind of charted out the romance kind of before, like the romantic element, right? The
Yeah.
romantic element in there. Did you always know how many books you would have in the series and kind of where that would take place?
Well, I thought it might take a few more books, but my characters are getting impatient. And I hate that feeling where the author's drawn something out just to draw it out.
Mm.
And B, I think readers are already saying, I love this book. I like everything about it, but it's got a romance triangle and it has for several books. And I'm like, okay, I've given them investment and now they're anxious and I need to pay it off before they get bored. But like we were saying earlier, that's the danger too, is it'll either transition the series into something that's deeper,
Hmm.
now that she'll have a commitment to one person, and the struggles of that being very different to the marriage she had the first time, um, which is going to open up some new emotional boxes and give her more room to grow. Or will readers be like, oh, that was nice, I'm done, everybody got a happy ending?
Yeah, you can lose that tension because that's like you said, I've noticed that in several books before. Is like if you have a romantic element and then you close that loop, and then you got you got that relationship where it's taken a deeper level, and then you don't go anywhere with that.
So I have an idea of where I want to go. It's just getting the readers to jump the big gap with me to the next level of it.
Well, and like you said, it sounds like the readers are on board with you. And like that seems like that's a natural thing that's happening in the books. So, do you know
Yeah.
how many books you're going to have for the series?
Like I said, I have outlines planned through 7,
Mm.
and then I'm gonna kind of see if readers are still hanging with me. Then I can sit down and plan this next aspect of her character arc.
Because I know that there are several cozy mystery series that have like a lot of books in them. So I'm just like, oh my gosh. So like I feel like you could go, especially now that she's so aware, she's a murder magnet, go a lot of different directions with that. You can keep that going.
Yeah. So book 6 is going to be Autumn's wedding, which I've been building towards.
Mm.
So I think you saw on my Instagram, I went to a wedding expo and wandered around and talked to people about their horror stories as wedding planners or DJs or whatever. And I don't know if I have the heart to actually have the murder happen at her reception. I'm very leery of that because there's been so much investment in building up to this event, and it means so much to both her and Felicity. And I'm like, well, that's the reason why you would have it happen there. But I don't know, I'm still in the outlining phase. And then because I've been doing all these different things with chocolate, book 7, I want them to visit Oregon because that's one of the things with chocolate making. A lot of chocolate makers will go and talk to the farmers that they're going to be working with. They look at the beans. They might give the farmers tips on how to better process so that it'll be more marketable. All of those kind of things. And it's an aspect of chocolate making that I feel like the series needs, because we've talked about everything from doing tours and you know going places and doing demos with desk or tabletop size chocolate making equipment, all that kind of stuff. It feels incomplete if we don't visit Origin. So I'm trying to find a way to make the characters all have a reason to go, so that it's not just now Felicity and whichever guy she chooses jetting off to a completely different set of characters. I think that would be a mistake because it would alienate you from that sense of community.
Mm.
So Autumn and her new husband and possibly Naomi and however many people I can fit in Logan's plane have to all go.
I like that too. You bring up a great point. Like, if you're going to set a cozy mystery in like a different place, right, than where you've
Yeah.
kind of established the series for the most part, then you should probably have like some of that community go with them.
I did that in book 3 when they wound up on the cruise ship. It's like all of a sudden, look, there's Ash. Oh, look, there's Drake. Huh. Arlo is doing a demo on, because it was a mystery cruise, and he's doing a demo on crime fighting techniques. Why is everyone here? Well, I needed them to be.
But I like that you thought of that ahead of time to make sure that the reader wasn't kind of left floundering when the protagonist
Yeah,
didn't have anybody that didn't have their kind of like the cozy
yeah,
aspect of the cozy mystery there with
had to
them.
have that.
Of course, that's what makes it so much fun is
Yeah.
like the cozy part of the cozy mystery. Otherwise, it's just like a mystery and I don't know what's going on.
They've done that kind too. But I don't think it's really ever fit the mold of that community based cozy.
Mm.
But it's like they did an episode with Jessica Fletcher where she goes on a cruise. They did an episode with Columbo and his wife that you never see, he references, but that's the only person he knows aboard the boat. It's a very different kind of thing because those are iconic detectives, but their community isn't really there. I mean, you never even meet his wife until she gets her own TV show, right?
Mm.
So the fact that he's encountering a completely new set of characters every episode makes sense. Whereas you have shows like Psych or Castle or some of the newer ones where you get attached to their friends. So even though it's not a cozy, you still have that sense that it's not just this one detective doing things that we just need to watch. We get to feel more part of it. I think when there's a group of characters and they're all friends, we vicariously, anytime you read, you have that whole persona taking thing that happens. That's why people cosplay their favorite characters, or they'll take on an accent or try and dress like whoever it is or whatever. Because when we like a character, when we like a world, we want to be part of it. And as we read, we vicariously take on that protagonist role in the world. They've actually done studies where they've had people read in front of mirrors. You can't immerse yourself in the same way if you are very aware because of the mirror that you are not part of the story. And so I think that when you have an ensemble cast and it feels like a group of friends, you feel like you fit in. Whereas if you have somebody like Sherlock Holmes, or if you have somebody like Columbo or whatever, and they're the one person running the show, I think it's harder to feel like you fit
Mm.
because they're so smart and they're so apart from everybody else. And I think that's what I like about writing cozies versus other types of crime fiction.
A lot of times those people that are just like so smart are kind of isolated in and of
Yeah.
themselves, like Sherlock or Columbo, like you were mentioning.
And it's interesting when you have somebody who is so set apart. It's like Sherlock has Watson. He's
Hmm.
got to. Because without Watson, there's no one for us to want to be
Hmm.
in the scenario, right? And there's a lot of different ways people are going with writing mysteries. And there's one series, I don't know if you can call it a cozy because he's a private detective, but it kind of feels like a cozy because it's told from the point of view of the dog. And it's the Chet and Bernie series. And Chet is this really fun dog, and he reads like an actual dog, and he gets distracted by things, and cats are his nemesis, and all of this stuff, and squirrel. Yeah, so he kind of hero worships Bernie. And I wonder if the story would work from Bernie's point of view, because Bernie's like this dead end detective, and he's got the best life going on, and he's a morally ambiguous kind of guy. But Chet thinks he's the best thing in the world. And it occurred to me the other day, I was writing an article about pets and mysteries, and I'm like, so he serves the same purpose as Watson serves to Sherlock Holmes. He bridges that connection.
And that just automatically piques my interest when you say like it's a mystery from like the dog's perspective.
There's some where they make it all cute, like the Sneaky Pie Brown mysteries, where Miss Murphy and I forget the corgi's name, they talk to each other and they make it to where there's no choice that Harry has, but she is going to solve this because they've showed her all the clues. And to me, that one is cute and it's fun, but it's not as complex as writing an animal that's actually behaving like an animal. And then you have the other end of the spectrum. One of the ones I've always liked is the Cat Who mysteries. It's Lilian Jackson Braun. There's a billion of them. And sadly, she passed away about two-thirds through the series, and her daughter took on the mantle and is now writing the books. But you have two cats in that one, and one of the cats can somehow tell there's going to be a murder. And so he will yowl a certain way, and it's like, okay, well, the case is on. And then the cats will accidentally like knock things over and uncover clues, or they'll escape, and you have to go find them the place where the clue is. So there's all different ways that you can look at companion animals in mysteries. And I think the most complicated one is to write it from the point of view, but actually have it read as an animal. I haven't done that in a long term, but with the Cozy Mystery blog tours, there's a lot of blogs where they want you to provide a guest post from the point of view of another character. And sometimes they'll want that character to be an animal. Like there's one that just went live from Mysteries, Mochas, and Murders, something like that. And the blog is hosted by the cat. So it's Mud Pie's blog, and Mudpie asked Ruffles to provide a blog post. And so it gets very meta, and it's a little bit challenging to see it from the animal's eyes, and I think it would be really hard to do that for the length of a full book.
I'm so intrigued.
But the article length is so much fun. I've written from the point of view of the octopus, I've written from the point of view of the rabbit. You find out the animal's backstory of what were they before, like Ruffles was rescued in a parking lot. And then the octopus was returned to a pet store, and all of these kind of things where I'm very much about the animals getting the good happiness, but a lot of them have a semi-tragic backstory.
So, where can listeners find your books or your classes?
So classes are at UT Arlington through the continuing education department. They're 5 weeks at a pop. I have some that are just starting. I don't know if there's still time to sign up or not, but you can always check out the next set where we're going to be talking about character, I believe, for 5 weeks. And that's through UT Arlington Continuing Education's website. You can find the books. We went through Ingram, so they would be widely available. So just about anywhere books are sold. So you can go to Amazon. There's an ebook version, so you can grab it for your Kindle, or you can grab the paperback, Barnes and Noble, or you can contact your indie bookstore. Because it's through Ingram, they can order it from Ingram's catalog. So if you want to support indie, you can definitely do it that way as well. I'm Amber Royer Author on Instagram and Facebook. I'm experimenting with TikTok. I have a blog. Website is just amberroyer.com. And I love talking to writers and interacting with readers. So come find me in the bonus recipes and the bonus puzzles and all the fun stuff.